So, we are going to be discuss specifically frozen embryo transfer in ovulatory patients. For non-ovulatory patients, it's very simple, an artificial cycle. But for ovulatory patients, we have to see what are our options. So the options with us for a patient who is already ovulating, that is, she has regular cycles, is either we can do a natural cycle frozen embryo transfer or a modified natural cycle, or we can even do an HRT cycle. These are the three options with us. So how do we decide? Or do we have something new? Now, at ASHRE this year, there was a whole session on Paris on Ice, and they had discussed the emerging data and the newer evidence, which has come up specifically for ovulating patients. What are the different newer options? And these options which were discussed was the flexible HCG trigger, the natural proliferative phase preparation, a programmed ovulatory cycle, and a modified artificial cycle. These protocols, they may be just one or two papers old in literature, but they make so much of sense and they have been used, and there is evidence that the monitoring becomes very simple with good results. So we'll see what all we can incorporate in our daily practice. So what's the logic and what's the evidence? Now, when we do an HRT cycle, either we inhibit ovulation or already that ovulation is not there. So there is absence of corpus luteum. Then, because of the absence of corpus luteum, there is absence of the corpus luteum secretory product, that is relaxin and other vasoactive peptides. And because of this, there is altered early pregnancy vascular adaptation and endothelial function and impaired decellulization placentation. This all leads to altered cardiovascular adaptation and leading to hypertensive disorders of pregnancy in patients who've had an artificial cycle for an FET cycle, artificial HRT cycle for an FET. And this could also be accompanied, the reason could also be not only because of the absence of the corpus luteum, but because the way we give estrogen and progesterone in an artificial cycle, we give such high dose of estrogen. So it could be a suboptimal way of the exogenous estrogen. And because of this also, that is the inadequate or suboptimal estrogen and progesterone could lead to unaltered endometrial preparation. So the complications which we have with an HRT cycle, that is, this is seen in mostly all studies, whether they are prospective, retrospective, or observational. In all studies, there is a higher incidence of hypertensive disorders of pregnancy, specifically preeclampsia, in patients who had a frozen embryo transfer with an HRT cycle. But we did not have any RCT till last year. So this was a systematic review in 2023. Again, as I said, there was no RCT till then. And the sum up was, in natural cycle, FET should be the preferred treatment in women with ovulatory cycles undergoing FET. Why? Because the incidence of hypertensive disorders of pregnancy, preeclampsia, placenta previa, PPH, early pregnancy loss was higher in cases which were undergoing an HRT cycle compared to those pregnancies which were conceived in a natural cycle FET protocol. And they concluded that for each adverse outcome, that is, the use of a natural cycle FET may prevent 4 to 22 cases per 1,000 women. So this was in 2023, but one should keep in mind, there have been no RCTs till then. Now, the first RCT which came up was in April 2025. This was a truncated RCT, truncated because there were some certain recruitment issues. And what could they conclude? They said that the risk of preeclampsia may be increased in artificial cycles for frozen embryo transfer. It was not statistically significant, but it may be increased. What was significant was a higher incidence of first trimester bleeding. Then the other RCT, which has just been published in January 2026, This has been powered to see for the complications of in pregnancy when we are using a natural ovulation cycle versus a programmed regime. And what did they conclude? Natural ovulation regime for endometrial preparation, whether it was a natural cycle or a modified natural cycle, was as effective as a programmed regime for achieving a healthy live birth. That is, the live birth rate was similar, but in cases of natural ovulation regime, it reduced the risk of several obstetric complications. And again, what were these obstetric complications? Preeclampsia, early pregnancy loss, placenta accreta spectrum, and postpartum hemorrhage. The rate of cycle cancellation, as we all know, is higher with a natural ovulation regime. That was 16% versus 11%. So this is the only RCT which is available till now. Other RCTs are recruiting, the results are not there. But whatever studies we have and this RCT, they all point to one thing, that there is an increase of hypertensive disorders of pregnancy in patients who conceive with an HRT cycle. And most of the studies, not all studies, but most of the studies point to an increased abortion rate or increased first trimester bleeding in the first trimester of pregnancies which have been conceived in an artificial cycle, artificial FET cycle. So having said that, the conclusion in literature, because of so much of glut of evidence, is that should any use of artificial cycle regime for a frozen throat embryo transfer in women capable of ovulation be abandoned? Well, the answer is yes. But then what do we do? So the principle is that if a patient is ovulating, we do not want to inhibit her ovulation. We want her to ovulate. Why? Because we want her corpus luteum to be there, because of the secretory products of the corpus luteum, which lead to a better pregnancy outcome. Also, if we are going to give her exogenous estrogen and progesterone, that would be not like what it is in a natural cycle. And because of that, there could be a higher miscarriage rate also. So now, what are the principles we have to keep in mind now that we want the corpus luteal to form? So the principles for preparing for frozen embryo transfer is we want the natural estrogen, that is the endogenous estrogen. What do we need the estrogen for? We need the estrogen for the endometrium preparation so that it is trilaminar. More than what is the magic figure we say is more than around 7 mm. And we want this to occur in an optimum time frame of 10 to 15 days, though even if it is more, pregnancy rates are similar, but the optimum time frame would be somewhere between 10 to 15 days. What else does estrogen do? It upregulates the progesterone receptors so that the progesterone can act and lead to desensitization of the endometrium in the secretory phase. What else does endogenous estrogen do? We need a level of around 200 to 300 picograms per ml for at least 50 hours so that the natural LH surge occurs. If that LH surge is going to occur, then only we are going to have ovulation and a good corpus luteum. So when we are planning a natural cycle or when we want her to have her natural ovulation, so the endogenous estrogen is going to work on these 3 points. Then progesterone. The progesterone is going to come from the corpus luteum in a natural cycle. And we all know that once ovulation occurs, that is the point when the corpus luteum starts secreting progesterone. Before ovulation, it is at very low, very steadily at low levels. It's hardly detected that it goes down to less than 0.05 nanogram per ml. And just a few hours prior to ovulation, it starts rising. It goes like, suppose if you have a 0.8, 0.9 nanogram, that means your ovulation is, that whole cycle is about to start. Then on the day of ovulation, it's somewhere around 1.5 nanogram per ml. So this is, and then later on in the secretory phase, it goes to up to 10 to 15 nanogram per ml. So this is the progesterone which we need if we're going to have a natural cycle, and this is how it goes. So we have to identify the time of ovulation so as to identify the time when progesterone is secreted because our main aim when we're doing a frozen embryo transfer is that the endometrium should be exposed to progesterone for at least the same duration as the age of the embryo. So we can only time our embryo transfer if we know when progesterone is present when progesterone is being secreted by the corpus luteum. For that, we have to identify the time of ovulation. For timing the ovulation, we have to know when the LH surge starts. So this is all in the context of knowing when we start getting progesterone in the blood. So now, keeping all this in mind, when we're doing a natural cycle for FET, for frozen embryo transfers, there is the endogenous estrogen, then there is an endogenous progesterone by the corpus luteum, and then we have to identify ovulation so as to know when progesterone secretion starts and so that we can time the FET. So when we're doing a natural cycle, we need a baseline ultrasound and then one ultrasound depending on her previous records of how long is a cycle. We may start it. If she has short cycles, we may do a ultrasound on day 8, day 9. If she has cycles around 28, 30 days, then we start monitoring around day 10, 11. So we monitor till her ET is more than 7 mm and we have a dominant follicle somewhere around 17, 18 mm and we have a trilaminar endometrium. So once these things are fulfilled, then this is what we want. We want a trilaminar endometrium. Once progesterone starts coming in, this is a picture of the endometrium which we have, and this is not what we want because once the endometrium is like this, that means the progesterone secretion has already started. So to identify ovulation in a natural cycle, how to go about it? The most common is the basic is to identify the LH surge. Now, identifying the LH surge can be from the serum or it can be from the urinary LH surge. But the urinary LH surge has its false positive and negatives. It is not the best way to monitor the time of ovulation. And if you're going to monitor serum LH, then is serum LH enough or we need to add progesterone or estradiol when we are doing a natural cycle? So this is how the natural LH surge, endogenous LH surge goes. So if we suppose we have one level, that is we say, okay, 20 IU or 18 IU is the level that the LH surge has peaked. So an 18 IU could be on the ascending limb, an 18 IU could be on the descending limb. So we would not know whether ovulation is yet to occur or it has already occurred. So the best way to make it more clear is to at least add one value of progesterone. If the progesterone is less than 1 nanogram, that means ovulation has not yet occurred. If the progesterone is more than 1 nanogram, that means progesterone has already occurred. And then accordingly, you can schedule your frozen embryo transfer. So this is the dynamics of ovulation. That is, first the LH rises and the progesterone is less than 1.5 nanogram. Then after the LH rise, the first thing that is marking ovulation is an E2 fall. That is, the estrogen falls, but the progesterone remains less than 1 nanogram. Then on the day of ovulation, there is an LH rise, E2 fall, and a P greater than 1.5. So if you want to be very sure, you need to do all these three values repeatedly. If you still, it would still be okay if you just do an LH and a P4 value to make it more simpler, but you still need to do it at least one or two, maybe you need to repeat it. So then secondly, you cannot control this LH surge. That is, you are dependent on whenever the LH surge rises, you are dependent of scheduling your frozen embryo transfer according to this. So it could be on a day when you're not free or on a weekend. And further, how do we define the LH surge? There are many variations. There are variations in the definition. There are variations in its amplitude. There are variations in its duration. And then even the interval from the LH surge to ovulation, there are variations. In endocrinology, it's just not always a fixed 36 hours or 24 hours. The variations are there. So an LH surge could be different in different patients, but the most common which is taken in literature is 17 or 20 IU. Then you have decided, okay, this is the LH surge in your practice, whatever figure you take, maybe you take it 18, 19, 20, whatever. Then how do we know that after how much time ovulation is going to occur? Now, the magic figure which we have in mind, this is a median time that comes from a WHO task force, that the median time from LH surge to ovulation is 24 to 32 hours. That is, ovulation is presumed 24 hours after LH surge. Now, this paper has come up a very nice study regarding the blood levels of progesterone and LH. And what they found was that in 1/3 of the cases, the progesterone rise was not as expected as in after 24 hours, which we presume. It was either 1 day later or 1 day earlier. So if we are going to go by broad averages, 1/3 of the patients are not going to fit into that average. Then if we're going to do a urinary LH kit, this has its issue, though for resource limited settings or for patients who are very far off, you may do it twice daily nearing the LH surge time. And you will get results, but it may not be the best way to monitor. Why? Because of its sensitivity, there could be 35% could have a false negative. Then in 8%, there could be a false positive because of premature LH surges. And then there is a time delay from the LH surge in the serum and to the urine, depending on her renal function and the amount of fluid she's taking. So this delay could be 1 to 2 days. Though home-based monitoring, this is an RCT which showed that home-based monitoring is non-inferior to hospital-controlled monitoring that is done twice daily. But one point that has been mentioned in this study is that the pregnancy rates they gave was just around 10 to 15%, which is very less than the normal pregnancy rates reported. So that has to be kept in mind. So the problems, to sum up with a simple natural cycle, is how do we define the LH surge? We cannot control it, so we cannot schedule our FET cycle. Then we are not sure that this LH surge is definitely going to lead to ovulation. Then we are not sure that if it's going to lead to ovulation, what is the time interval between that LH surge and ovulation? So to make things simpler, next is the modified natural cycle. Now, in a modified natural cycle, it's very simple. Once we have a prerequisite endometrium, that is ET more than 7, a trilaminar pattern, and we have a dominant follicle, somewhere between 16 to 19 mm, and the progesterone levels are less than 1 or 1.5 nanogram. Once these figures are there, then you can give an HCG trigger. So that will lead to ovulation. And we have, again, this magic figure in mind that after an HCG trigger, in most of the cases, ovulation occurs after 36 to 40 hours. So this showed comparable pregnancy rates, whether you use a modified cycle or not, the pregnancy rates were comparable. But the question comes that if there is an LH surge, what it's over here as I left this point, an LH level also needs to be done in cases of when you are planning to give an HCG trigger. Why? Because if already the LH surge is there, then the time for frozen embryo transfer has to be timed according to the LH surge. That is, it would be around 24 hours after the LH surge. If the LH surge is not there, then you time your transfer after around 36 to 40 hours after the HCG trigger. So by giving an HCG trigger, somehow you can control the cycle for at least 1 to 2 days is in your hands, and you can control the scheduling. And one thing you're sure that, okay, you've given a trigger so that at least this exogenous LH surge is there and then ovulation is going to occur. But is it really so? No, then we'll come to that. So there is no standardization. It's all on your practice, whatever your experience is. In literature, all doses have been given. 4,000, 5,000, 8,000, 10,000 in IU of HCG. And the recombinant HCG, 250 micrograms. Everything has been reported. So when to transfer? The transfer would be 2 days later, 36 to 48 hours after the HCG trigger. So then you plan your frozen embryo transfer according to, like, if it's a blast, then from the trigger, 2 days to ovulation and 5 days more, that is 2 plus 5 on the 8th day. If it's an and if it's a cleavage day 3 embryo, then it will be +2 +3, that is on the 6th day. Now, again, this was a paper presented at ASHRAE. It is not published, but they gave their data, and what they did was they gave a trigger to their patients, and then they measured the progesterone levels for the next 3 to 4 days. And what did they find? Again, the same 30% variation. That is, 1 patient out of 3, there is a delay in ovulation by 1 day after HCG trigger. That it occurred 48.
No, she needs to be properly sedated. She's anxious because of what happened to her baby before.
And you plan.
So she just needs to be properly sedated and so that she sleeps.
Kindly mute.
No, it doesn't matter. She needs to rest. She shouldn't get up. She needs to be properly sedated so she doesn't need to think and worry.
Yeah.
I think this kind of patient, knock them off.
Kindly mute yourself.
Give them safe sedation.
I hope everything is clear and audible. Dr. Pooja?
Knock them off, let them rest.
Everything is clear and
He's only going by weekend with the children.
Somebody
that was why.
Needs to mute himself.
Eh?
Dr. Bond, kindly mute
She should ignore it and lie down. I should not get up. If she needs to get up,
you'll have to mute them yourself.
That's what they would do, eh?
You can mute them yourself. Okay. So again, there is a variation of 1/3 as okay. So 1/3 of the patients, the ovulation occurred, the progesterone rise occurred 24 hours later than expected. So these variations are there whenever we're doing a natural cycle or modified natural cycle, and it's taken care of because we also know that the window of implantation is wide. Like we can have a +24 hours ± variation.
Sorry, somebody is unmuted, so we are not able to hear whatever you
I know we are doing it. We'll just do it.
Can you repeat whatever about the modified?
Yes, I'm saying it.
I could not understand actually.
I will just repeat. Mute karna hai sabko, kaise kare? 1 second, we'll just mute everybody and then I'll speak.
You simply tell us about the modified.
Yes, I'm coming. Stop screen share कर दो. Stop screen share. इसको सबको mute कर दो. I think we will mute every. कहाँ से करें? नहीं बाकियों को mute करना है ना. सबको mute करना है. हाँ, 1 second. किधर है? Mute on. Allow participants to unmute themselves. No. So, am I clear? Okay. आप देखो I will unmute Pooja. Rachit, come here. Am I mute on? Allow participants to unmute themselves. Yes. Okay. So am I audible? We are just muting everybody. Dr. Pooja, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, ma'am, you're audible now.
Okay. Oh, again, I don't know. I'm going to mute everybody.
For the timing, I think my mic also can be muted. That's okay. In the end of the talk, we'll see.
So I was here. So what just to repeat that in the study, they found out that when an HCG trigger is given and they did their progesterone levels, in 1/3 of the patients, the progesterone levels were of the ovulatory range 24. There was a delay of 24 hours. That is, the 36 to 40 hours is not a magic figure. Again, 1/3 of the patient, there was a delay. So over the years, we have been using natural cycle and modified natural cycle. We are having good results. It could be because the window of implantation is wide. But if we want to take care of all our patients, then we have to be sure when the progesterone rises after the HCG trigger, because 1/3 of the patients, there is a delay in ovulation beyond the 48 hours, which is expected in an HCG trigger. Also, what is the downside of giving an HCG trigger? We know when we give an HCG trigger, there is a sudden rise of progesterone. And this progesterone sudden rise is not what happens naturally. Naturally, after ovulation, it's
Kindly share
around...
your screen. Your screen is not visible now.
Okay. I was sharing it. Is it visible now?
No,
Is it visible,
not
Dr.
to
Pooja?
me. Not to me. It's not visible yet.
Acha. We'll do it. 1 second. You share. Wait, I'll just do it. Is it visible now?
I think it's starting. Let's wait, ma'am. It's starting. Let's wait. Yeah, it's visible now.
Okay. So, as I was saying, the downside of HCG is because the trigger that gives rise to a sudden endogenous increase in the progesterone levels, which is not what normally happens. So normally the progesterone rises very gradually, that is on the day of ovulation 1.5, after that is 3 nanogram. But when we are giving HCG, the levels go straight forward to around 100 to 150 nanograms. So that may have a downside effect on the endometrial receptivity. Then the relation with LH and HCG is, it's a question mark that if an LH rise is already there, then should we give the trigger or not? So these 2-3 points make these are the negative sides of the modified natural cycle, but a modified natural cycle is much simpler compared to a natural cycle. So these are the two options till now which we were most commonly using for an ovulatory cycle. Then when we are using a modified natural cycle or a natural cycle, however we are timing it, do we need to give the luteal phase support, or is the presumed corpus luteum that is forming, that is fine? Dr. Pooja, I'm audible and the screen is okay?
Yes, ma'am, everything is okay.
Okay.
Screen is also visible.
Thank you so much. So then do we need to give the luteal phase support? Now, why do we need to give progesterone? We need to give progesterone. One is to prepare the endometrium, and the second is to as a luteal phase support to supplement whatever the corpus luteum progesterone is there. So now, are we sure that when we are giving an HCG trigger or we're doing a natural cycle and monitoring the LH surge, are we sure that ovulation has taken place? Are we sure that ovulation has taken place on the presumed time which we have in mind? And then lastly, once the corpus luteum is formed, are we sure that the corpus luteum is functioning normally also? Because we know that there is this figure which has been ingrained in us. We have studied this figure so many times that there is a luteal phase defect in around 18 to 20% of the infertile patients. And this was again very nicely proven in 2024, an article, The Natural Menstrual Cycle Revisited. Can we trust our natural cycle? And they saw that in around 40% of the patients who were normally menstruating, the levels of progesterone were less than 10 nanogram in around 40%. So even if we're doing a natural cycle or we're doing a modified natural cycle, these patients are infertile patients and they have a high, and even normal patients also have an progesterone less than 10 nanograms in their random cycle. So we need to give exogenous progesterone because we cannot rely fully on the functional capacity of the corpus luteum, which is formed naturally in an infertile patient. So this was also proven again in natural cycle frozen embryo transfer. What they did is that 1 day before an embryo transfer in natural cycles, they did the progesterone levels, and in 37% of the patients, the progesterone levels were less than 10 nanogram. And in these patients, the pregnancy rate was much lower compared to what it was in the patients who were greater than 10 nanograms. So the conclusion was, and this is also a systematic review, the conclusion was that there is moderate quality evidence suggesting that progesterone supplementation for luteal phase support is associated with increased live birth rate and clinical pregnancy rate in natural cycle FET cycles. Do we need to give progesterone in modified natural cycle? The evidence is not that strong. And this is an RCT which has just been published in 2026. This is just one of the very few RCTs. There are just 2 or 3 RCTs which have discussed this topic of giving luteal phase support in cycles which are modified natural cycles. And they came to the conclusion that this RCT demonstrates that supplementary progesterone likely does not improve live birth rates. So it is for you to decide whether you want to give progesterone or not in a modified natural cycle. Perhaps the HCG trigger acts as a luteal phase support. But if you're not using the trigger, then progesterone needs to be added. So if we are going to add progesterone, then at what time point do we add progesterone? How do we decide? Do we start it on the day of embryo transfer? Do we give it 2 days before the embryo transfer? Do we give it on the presumed day of ovulation? How do we decide on what time, at what time do we need to start luteal phase support? So this depends on what do we have in mind. Why do we want to give progesterone in the first place? There could be 2 reasons. We want to give progesterone so as to supplement the corpus luteum endogenous progesterone. So we presume that around 30% of the cases, maybe the corpus luteal is not functioning adequately and we just want to supplement the progesterone. Or we also have this in mind that we are not sure regarding the ovulation, when it's occurring, at what interval from the LH surge, or if you're giving a trigger, HCG trigger, then is it occurring around 36 hours after the HCG trigger? So if we are not sure or we want to make it very foolproof, then we can start the progesterone on the presumed time of the ovulation so that at the time of the transfer, we have a 100% endometrial embryo synchrony before the frozen embryo transfer. So keeping these 2 things in mind, we start luteal phase support either on the day of expected ovulation, that is LH +1 or HCG +2. If we started on luteal day 1, then there are higher chances of endometrial embryo synchrony. Or we may start it up to 3 days after ovulation or even on the day of ET as it is reported in literature. There are no RCTs regarding the different time points. But one has to keep the physiology and the endocrinology in mind that this is, if I'm going to start it from luteal 1, this is what I have in mind, or if I'm going to start it later. You have to decide what works best in your practice. Then, as in artificial cycles, there is so much talk about doing progesterone levels on the day of embryo transfer. Do we need to do the progesterone levels when we are doing a natural cycle or a modified natural cycle? When we are the difference, one thing main is when we are doing artificial cycle and we're giving exogenous progesterone, we are inhibiting ovulation, giving exogenous. So the levels are uniform. But when we are giving a natural cycle or a modified natural cycle, the progesterone is endogenous. So we know the pulsatility is there. So a serum progesterone pulsatility has to be kept in mind. A single value significance is not there. And there is a diurnal variation of the endogenous progesterone. Having said that, but the evidence is also there that with luteal support, if we are giving luteal support from the day of embryo transfer, there is no need to do the progesterone levels for both either in natural cycle or modified natural cycle protocols. This is proven in many studies. That is, if you are giving luteal phase support, either you're giving it from luteal day 1 or even on the day of embryo transfer, you do not need to do the progesterone levels. So this is a very, I would say, a clear take-home message. Then, which progesterone do you need to give? You here in an natural cycles, we are supplementing. So we don't need to give very high dose. So anything micronized vaginal progesterone, 200 BD, 400 BD, tablets, 100 BD, 100 TDS, they all have been reported in literature. The progesterone gel, 90 milligram OD, a pessary. Then aqueous progesterone, maybe not, it's not the drug of choice. If or any one of you is using it regularly, we'd like to have your inputs regarding it. Dydrogesterone 30 milligram daily has been coming up in frozen embryo transfer, though it is not the standard of care. Intramuscular progesterone may be too much for a natural cycle. But in India, over here, we are very fond of using intramuscular progesterone. And what does it add on over to the other natural, other micronized progesterone is it might be decreasing the uterine contractility because of the increased systemic levels. It helps in immunomodulation, and there is a paper where intramuscular progesterone, wherever it was used, there was a lower hypertensive incidence of lower hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. This is just a study. This, I would just say, a food for thought. And it could be also because if we, in our practice in India, I think so, you can share your viewpoints, but we have compiled our data and we have seen that whenever we're using artificial cycle, the incidence of hypertensive disorders of pregnancy was not significantly different from the other natural cycle. It could be because of the intramuscular progesterone. I don't know. I like to have your viewpoints on this. And the dose of intramuscular progesterone, somewhere 50, 70, 100 is too high a dose because the levels go very high. We had done our, because we use so much of intramuscular progesterone, and intramuscular progesterone is not used outside, very less often used outside. So we just compiled our own data and saw that when we give 100 milligram of intramuscular progesterone, the levels go very high. The levels have ranged between 15 nanogram to 234 nanogram. So the most optimal results are in the second tertile, and because of that is this value 32 to 43, and because of this, after this we have stopped using 100 milligram. We have switched over to something between 50 to 70 milligram. So the problems with the natural cycle or even a modified natural cycle is higher cancellation rates. In many blood tests which need to be done, endocrinology monitoring, the patients need to come again and again. Urinary kits have their own issues. The scheduling issues are with there. And even with a modified natural cycle, the issues are there is a 30% variation of ovulation. That is, all patients do not ovulate between that 36 to 40 hours. Then the association of LH rise is questionable when how to manage when the LH rise is there with a HCG trigger. We need to add progesterone levels to see that ovulation has not already occurred. Then the downstream effects of HCG is there on the endometrium because of the sudden rise of progesterone, excuse me, and the cancellation rates, yes. So to make these two cycles simpler, make a natural cycle and a modified natural cycle simpler would be adding progesterone from the presumed day of ovulation so that you are sure that adequate duration of progesterone is there for optimal embryo endometrial synchrony. So this would cover up for those 30% variation of whether ovulation is occurring or is it occurring on the time. So you do a natural cycle and then add progesterone from whatever your presumed day of ovulation. If you're giving a trigger, you start it from 36 hours later. If you are defining an LH surge, then you start it 24 hours later and then time your transfer. So this is what we have. Now, these are the newer, simpler options, which are very simple. There is no endocrinology monitoring with very good results. So we'll just discuss the endocrinology and the simplicity of these options. So the first is the flexible HCG trigger. Then we have the natural proliferative phase, the programmed ovulatory cycle. These are basically the same. These two are basically the same, but by different groups. This is by Professor Grisinger. This is by the Godino group. The only difference in these two is in the natural proliferative phase, they have used micronized progesterone 400 BD, and the programmed ovulatory cycle, they have used dydrogesterone 30 milligram daily. So otherwise, the basic principle which I will be discussing is the same. So now, what is a flexible HCG trigger? So up till now, in a modified artificial cycle, we were using an HCG trigger when the follicle is dominant. That is, it is something around 17, 18, 19 mm. But in this study, what did they find? That even if they trigger at the size of 13 to 22 mm, the pregnancy rates were good. They were similar. So you get another flexibility of 2 to 3 days. That is, you don't have to wait. Like if you want to transfer early, you can trigger even at smaller diameters of the follicle. But a question was raised in a study was that when you are triggering at smaller follicles, that is 13 mm, 14 mm, do we expect a fully adequate functional corpus luteum? Because our main aim in all these cycles is to keep the corpus luteum intact and functional so that we get the good vasoactive peptides, relaxin 2, which is going to decrease the obstetrical complications. So if that purpose is defeated, that if you're going to give a trigger at 13 mm, maybe the pregnancy rates are the same, but the complication rates yet we don't know whether this corpus luteum is adequately functional or not. So this is just for you to know that this is what is coming up in literature. Then this is the one which is a very simple protocol. I will go very slowly about it so that it sinks in. The natural proliferative phase. What is done is the first half of the cycle is like a natural cycle. That is, you just continue as you're doing a natural cycle or a modified natural cycle. You don't have to monitor the dominant follicle. You just monitor the endometrium. Once the endometrium is trilaminar, it is somewhere around 7-8 mm, and 10 days have passed. That is, 10 days is one thing which we want the cycle length to be in the proliferative phase. So once you reach that point, irrespective whether the dominant follicle is 13 mm, 14 mm, irrespective, don't look at the dominant follicle. So you do a progesterone level, and if the progesterone level is less than 1 nanogram, that means ovulation has not occurred. So then you can start your progesterone, like you start your progesterone in an HRT cycle, and you give your progesterone for 5 days, and on the 6th day, you can do a blast transfer, or on the 4th day, you can do a date-free transfer. So there is no monitoring. It is just monitoring the first half of the cycle with the ultrasound. That is, the endometrium gets thick enough as much as you are okay with. You do a P4 level. If it is less than 1 nanogram, you may go on for 1 or 2 days, or you may start your progesterone. So now what happens, you are sure that the endometrial embryo synchrony is there. You are sure that ovulation has not occurred yet. And we presume, in this study group, they said, we presume that the corpus luteum is going to be formed because we did not inhibit the corpus luteum by giving high estrogens over here as we do in an artificial cycle. So I will just repeat this. This is something which needs to be one has to understand, because it is a very good protocol, a very simple protocol. The first half of the cycle is just simple natural cycle. Once the endometrium is good and the progesterone is less than 1 nanogram, you can start your progesterone and you give the progesterone like you give a progesterone in the artificial cycle, and time the transfer accordingly. So this was their paper published. They were first presented their work from 2021 onwards in different meetings, and then it was published in 2024. And they said it is a new approach which may facilitate scheduling without hindering pregnancy outcomes. So we had also presented our work in ASHRAE regarding this natural cycle proliferator. This was 2-3 years back. And what we found was that the pregnancy rates, abortion rates were significantly less in a natural cycle compared to an artificial cycle, and our live birth rates were significantly more. So as I said, in most of the studies, when we're doing an artificial cycle, and even I would like your experience on it, that the pregnancy loss rate, the first trimester loss rate is pretty high compared to a natural cycle. So a natural cycle proliferative phase, where the first half of the cycle is like a normal cycle, our abortion rates were significantly less, as you can see over here. Then this was just in October. This was done at ASRM. There are a few studies published on natural proliferative phase, and now we have a systematic review and meta-analysis. And they concluded that the emerging NPP-FET protocol demonstrates promising reproductive and perinatal outcomes, offering scheduling flexibility without compromising efficacy. And there is least endocrinology monitoring that is required. And there is ensured endometrial synchrony. Now, again, the question came, is that our purpose is that the corpus luteum should be there. The group which promoted this protocol, they argue that we are not inhibiting the corpus luteum in the first half of the cycle. So we presume, they said they are yet doing their studies, they said we presume that the corpus luteum will be functional. So this was a comment in a paper that in this protocol, though it is good, it is simple. We don't know if progesterone as luteal phase support inhibits the LH pulses and consequently the corpus luteal function, because we are starting progesterone before ovulation has occurred. So once you start progesterone before ovulation, before the LH surge, it could inhibit the LH surge and maybe the corpus luteum doesn't form at all. So then the whole purpose of this protocol would get defeated. So now we are much wiser. This is just recently published. These are two groups. They studied the NPP-FET protocol, and these both groups gave dydrogesterone as luteal phase support. They confirmed spontaneous ovulation by seeing the progesterone levels. That is, so when you are giving dydrogesterone in a natural proliferative phase, 10 milligrams TDS, the corpus luteum is functional in nearly all the patients. Now, we know with dydrogesterone, we know in many cases that dydrogesterone does not inhibit ovulation, especially when we are using dydrogesterone for endometriosis patient. But dydrogesterone is not the standard of care for our FET cycle. Not like the majority of us worldwide are using micronized progesterone. So can micronized progesterone, will it behave the same as dydrogesterone regarding the corpus luteal function? We did a study, which is yet to be, we have sent it for publication, that is in a natural proliferative phase FET cycle, micronized progesterone was used as luteal phase support. And how did we determine whether the corpus luteum is present or not? We did the relaxin-2 levels in the patients who became pregnant. So the relaxin-2 levels in pregnancy comes only from the corpus luteum. So if you're giving micronized progesterone as luteal phase support, we cannot do progesterone levels to see if the corpus luteum is functioning. We determined the serum relaxin-2 levels at 6 to 8 weeks of pregnancy. And what were our results? We confirmed that ovulation occurred in around 89% of the patients. So that means in this cycle, the corpus luteum is present. But what we also saw was that the relaxin-2 levels were significantly less as what is compared. We compared it with pregnancy, patients who became pregnant spontaneously in our OPD. We did their relaxin-2 levels at 6 to 8 weeks, and then we compared the relaxin-2 levels at 6 to 8 weeks in pregnancies who had conceived by this NPP-FET protocol. The corpus luteal was there, but the relaxin-2 levels on the whole were much less compared to what is seen in a spontaneous pregnancy. So this is the range of the relaxin-2 levels in a spontaneous pregnancy, and our lowermost value was somewhere around 150 nanogram. Now, the significance of levels we don't know yet. There are more studies which are coming up in literature. So by the end of the year, we'll have more data regarding the corpus luteal function in a natural proliferative phase cycle. But other than that, it is a very effective and simple protocol. Then this is the last modification which I like to discuss. This also we had presented our work at ASHRAE. what we had done is that in the first half of the cycle, at times one is not confident that, okay, we are just totally depending on the natural cycle, that after 9-10 days, are we going to have that endometrium, good endometrium? At times, maybe not. It's not that each cycle is the same. So what we did is we started giving patients transdermal gel on from day 3 to day 5 of the cycle. We gave them a dose, one application twice daily. So this is just like a supplementing the endogenous estrogen, and we got a good endometrium lining. So this was, and then the second half of the cycle was followed like a natural proliferative phase cycle. So this also gave us very good pregnancy rates comparable, and it's an option. This is what we do in our practice. We give a little of a transdermal gel. We started a little late so that it does not inhibit ovulation. So to sum up, what are our options? Whether you use an HRT cycle, natural cycle, modified natural cycle, there are comparable pregnancy rates, but the problems are with the increased early abortion rates, increased hypertensive disorders of pregnancy, increased placental problems, increased LSCS, increased large for date babies. And this is presumed, leaving large for date babies, this is presumed due to the absence of corpus luteum and the suboptimal endometrial preparation. So we should prefer a protocol where the corpus luteum is functioning. You can use, there are comparable results, whether you time ovulation by urine or serum LH, but urine LH has its own false negative positive rates. So it is not the best way to go forward. But if there is a problem with the patient cannot come for repeated endocrinology test, a BD urine test done, LH test done is reasonably good. Serum LH, we don't know which cutoff to take, somewhere between 15 to 20 IU. We presume ovulation to occur 24 hours later. It is always better, it is rather a must to add P4 levels, and it should be less than 1 nanogram, so you know that the ovulation has not yet occurred. And there could be, the ovulation day is somewhere 24 hours later. If we are using an HCG trigger, ovulation occurs 36 hours later. We can trigger a follicle at a variable diameter, that is from 13 to 22 mm. It is, I would say, a must to add progesterone levels so that you know that progesterone has not, ovulation has not started. Some may argue that a trilaminar endometrium is a good enough sign that, okay, ovulation has not occurred, but we have seen that ovulation means 1.5 to 2 nanograms, and at that point of time, the endometrium may still be trilaminar. So it is always better to add progesterone levels when you are timing your frozen embryo transfer. If LH is more than 20 IU, when you are giving an HCG trigger, that is, if you have an associated LH surge, then you must transfer according to the LH surge rather than an HCG trigger surge, HCG trigger timing. Then do we need to do serum progesterone levels at the time of ET? No evidence. There is no evidence. This is very clear that we do not need to do serum progesterone levels. Do we need to give luteal phase support? Yes, because we are not very sure that the corpus luteum is always going to be functioning properly. And also it helps in embryo endometrial synchrony if given from the produced day of ovulation, because there is an asynchrony of 30% whether we use an LH surge or we use an HCG trigger for the timing of ovulation. Natural cycle FET, luteal support from day of ET or day of presumed ovulation. Modified natural cycle, the evidence for luteal phase support is not that strong as for natural cycle. It may be given, it may not be given, and there is no role of HCG as luteal phase support. When do we start progesterone? Again, there are no RCTs, but it could be from the presumed day of ovulation or any time between ovulation and the embryo transfer. With progesterone, anything works because we are supplementing. You can use capsules, gel, even dydrogesterone has given results, 30 milligram daily. And if you're using intramuscular progesterone, it should be less than 100 milligram per day. Newer options are the flexible HCG trigger, proliferative phase, programmed ovulatory cycle, and the modified artificial cycle. These are just 1 or 2, 3, 4 papers old. but they make sense and they are coming up, especially the natural proliferative cycle. Now, this is awaited RCT. This has been specifically powered to see for the complications of hypertensive complications, natural versus program. So let's see what the results come. And to sum up, we cannot just abandon a program frozen embryo transfer cycle. It's a very simple way to go about it. And it's just not that hypertensive disorders are so high in incidence. We can take our precautions, and especially patients who are obese or who have a higher risk, we can do a natural cycle. Other patients specifically who have endometriosis, adenomyosis, irregular cycles, patient preference, risk factors, we may opt for an HRT cycle. So you have to decide. But this was just the evidence and the rationale for choosing which protocol over the other. So thank you so much. And it will be nice that we have your queries or comments or experiences, because everybody is doing so much of frozen embryo transfer. I think it's more than 50% in everybody's clinic. So whatever works best for you, we like to know from your point of view, your options for doing a frozen embryo transfer in ovulatory patients. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for making things so much crisp, clear, and all the protocols you explained so well. I'm sure the way I enjoyed the talk, I hope all the participants must have enjoyed the talk so much. It was so engrossing. We didn't realize when the 1 hour has gone. It's so wonderful with so much of robust evidence. It was really free to listen to you. It was wonderful talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr.
So all the questions are welcome. Kindly participants, they can unmute themselves and post their questions, or they can ask directly. Ma'am, I have one question. Do you time your serum progesterone levels? Like, there are diurnal variations, as we know. Like, what time do you prefer to get the serum progesterone levels done?
The evidence is that it is highest in the morning and lowest in the evening around 4 p.m. But we do our progesterone, we don't time it. It's just when we are timing a frozen embryo transfer and the patient comes, then we do the progesterone, or otherwise any time. It's usually in the morning times.
Yeah, okay.
So we just want that it should be less than 1 nanogram before we start the trigger. So that is there.
Okay, yeah.
So we have a question. Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. To do more of natural cycle and modified natural cycle, yes, and no need of progesterone levels. No, progesterone levels at the time of embryo transfer, you don't need to do, because you have to supplement it with progesterone. But to decide the LH surge timing or to decide the HCG trigger, at that time, a P4 value must be done to be sure that ovulation has not yet occurred. That is, the P4 levels should be less than 1 nanogram. But and then you start your progesterone, at whatever point you decide, you start your progesterone before the embryo transfer. But on the day of embryo transfer, like in HRT cycles, they advise that when you're using vaginal progesterone, you must do a progesterone level and it should be more than 10 nanogram. For natural cycle and modified natural cycle, you do not need to do progesterone levels on the day of embryo transfer. But on the day of the trigger, or when you're deciding your LH surge, then one value definitely needs to be done.
Ma'am, I think Dr. Verma wants to know, in HRT cycles, do we need to do progesterone levels before starting luteal phase support, like 3 days before? Do you use in HRT cycle like the way we do it in modified natural cycle or natural cycle? Like before, what I practice is, before I put the patient on progesterone, like 3 days before embryo transfer, we get the progesterone levels done. So I think that's what Dr. Verma wants to know. Do you do progesterone levels in HRT cycles also before putting them on LPS?
Before, in HRT cycle, LPS starts from the luteal day 1. So we start our progesterone only when we are sure that progesterone is less than 1 nanogram. If it's more than 1 nanogram, then we cancel the cycle because ovulation has already occurred. So that is why. So before starting the luteal phase in artificial cycle, we have done one progesterone. Then on the time of embryo transfer, again the question comes, is our luteal phase support enough? That do we need to add on? So if you are just giving vaginal progesterone, then you need to do a repeat progesterone on the day of embryo transfer. But if you're using a combination, like if you're using intramuscular progesterone or dydrogesterone and vaginal progesterone, then maybe not, because there's enough evidence if you're using two progesterone, the levels are adequate enough. So there are two time points regarding progesterone. One is before starting progesterone and one is before doing the embryo transfer.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's nice one. Thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions?
In flexible natural cycle, will you add estrogen before trigger? There is no evidence to need to add estrogens. We don't, as I said, we just add estrogens in the first half of the cycle just to increase the endometrial thickness, just to be more confident. Yes, because sometimes her own endogenous estrogen may not be enough, or you may not get a good estrogen. Thank you. So that is our own protocol, but it is not recommended that you do not need to give estrogen in a natural cycle or a modified natural cycle as in the second half of the cycle or in the first half. And specifically before the trigger, no. Like, what would, Dr. Pooja, what's your experience with estrogen in these cycles?
Yeah, same, ma'am. Even we do the same. I usually I'm giving transdermal a lot nowadays.
Yeah, transdermal is very good. It's really good. It gives a very good results, transdermal.
Yeah, even we are not scared of side effects also. Like I just share my experience. Like couple of years back, I had a patient who had undergone the HRT cycle and frozen embryo transfer. After her cesarean, she had some clots in her brain. Like she used to feel giddy, and we found something was there in her brain. Like she was admitted for under neurology department. So that really scared me. So from that time onwards, I'm really started using transdermal estrogen a lot. So
And
I
the
think that really
effect,
prevents.
and its effect on the endometrium is much better than what you get with the tablets, estradiol tablets also at a very lower dose. So I think if you're not using transdermal estrogen, just try using it, and in a few patients, and you'll see the difference. You hardly just need 3 applications or 2 applications, and you get a good endometrium, even for the artificial cycles, in the artificial cycles.
Even the gastric symptoms also decrease. That is another big advantage.
Definitely. And you are safe. You are safer than those thromboembolic.
Yeah. Because one of my patients, she also had deep vein thrombosis, although she had not undergone frozen embryo transfer. She had fresh transfer, but these kind of complications might come up later on.
Yes, they do.
Which come up after delivery, which is really, it is very important to I think be aware of the side effects also. It is not just we want positive pregnancy results. We want to prevent our patients from side effects also. That is also very important to learn.
Yes, you have to make it safe. The pregnancy is a very dangerous thing to have.
Yeah. And moreover, ma'am, we get a lot of patients who are 40 plus, who are near 40, 45. So we have to be very careful when we are giving high doses of estrogen. That really always scares me whenever we are giving higher doses of estrogen.
Yes, so right, Dr. Pooja.
Yeah.
So I just saying, just for clarity, we need progesterone more than 10 nanograms in HRT FET before transfer, yes. And the P4 level should be below 1 nanogram before the HCG trigger. Yes, that's perfectly correct. Absolutely fine. And just in case you are using an intramuscular progesterone or a dydrogesterone in vaginal, then you may skip doing a progesterone level at the time of embryo transfer. This is specifically for those where only vaginal progesterone is used. So, but you can do your levels and see. But what you have typed is absolutely correct, Dr. Davies. Then, is there a significant variation in positive pregnancy rates between MNC and HRT? What we found is the pregnancy rates were similar, but the abortion rates in our practice, they were very high in HRT FET cycles. Maybe initially, a few years back, we were using estradiol tablets. I would also say that the estradiol tablets, somehow the doses were high, 2 tablets TDS our abortion miscarriage rates were high. They were up to around 30%. So over the years, we've stopped using Estradiol tablets and we're using transdermal Estradiol gel, even for HRT cycles. And now we are getting comparable pregnancy rates compared to a natural cycle and comparable abortion rates. So they're all good. There's no difference in the pregnancy rates. It's now, I would say, the complication rates of hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. But in our practice, we do not high incidence of hypertension disorder. What about you, Dr. Like for donor IVF cycles, yes, it's very gross. Most of the patients have a hypertension, but I think my voice is
Dr. Madhukar Roy, do you want to ask a question? Hello.
Now it's clear.
Voice is not clear.
So we have a question by Dr. Archana. Is my voice echoing?
Yeah, ma'am. It's echoing. There's a lot of echo.
I don't know from where it's coming.
I think rest of us can mute ourselves.
So in modified natural cycle, we can start with letrozole. I think so. Letrozole specifically for patient care. A patient who's already ovulating, we don't have that in mind to give her ovulation.
Ma'am, there's a lot of echo. Your voice is not. There's a lot of echo.
Why is it coming? Is it fine now?
No, ma'am, it's okay. I think we can continue.
So I think so.
कुत्ते की वजह से हमारे सही कहा लोग पहले ही विदेशी घर में पालते हैं
Dr. Sandeep Chineja, can you please mute yourself?
Dr. Pooja?
Yeah, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Now it's better. Yeah. Now there's no
I
echo.
have to mute everyone.
Yeah.
So I think you'll have to type your questions because otherwise there's a lot of echo that crosses. So
Somebody asked question about letrozole in modified cycle, natural cycle.
I don't use it, but I don't use letrozole. If at all I have to use, I just give 2 injections of HMG. But in a natural cycle, that would be for an anovulatory or irregular ovulation. Otherwise, for ovulatory cycles, you may use it. I don't use it. Dr. Pooja, what do you say?
Ma'am, only once or twice I remember there was one patient who was not responding well to HRT. I just gave her a chance that let me try with letrozole. I gave her 5 mg letrozole. She had better endometrium and I did transfer her and she was positive. So once in a while, it's not a very common thing. Once in a while.
Those who are anovulatory, yes, it's a good option.
Yeah, either anovulatory or sometimes you see that HRT is not working. You don't see anything on hysteroscopy also. It is like trying another thing. It's just like that.
Yes. So how to give transdermal estrogen in an FET protocol? So we give 2 to 3 applications. That is 2.5 grams is one applicator, and that has 1.5 milligram of estradiol, which is equivalent to 2 milligram of the tablet. Yeah. So one applicator is equivalent to 2 milligram of the tablet, but it is more effective. And we start with, in certain patients who are young, we just give them twice an application. Then after 5 to 7 days, we may increase it to thrice. But we haven't needed to increase it more than 3 times application in a day. And then we continue the same post transfer also. Yeah. So just
Same,
2 to
same.
3 transdermal it's really good. You
Yeah.
must all try it. Like if you're not using it, you must try it and you'll see the difference. Like initially, I also thought maybe the tablets give much better endometrium, but it's not that. It's like a more effective estrogen.
Yeah, because initially we tried in mock cycles, then once we were confident, then we switched them over to actual
Yes.
cycles. So it is always better. Anything which new thing you are trying, you can try it in mock cycles so that you're more confident.
Yeah, and so we can share with each other, so it becomes
Yeah.
more. So these are practical things. And
Yeah,
if
yeah.
one wants to add to your experience and what are you doing in your cycle, so it'll be nice to hear from all of you. You can put it in the
Have you
chat.
ever tried vaginal estrogen in any of the patients? Like
I
sometimes when we
used to
saw.
when I wasn't getting good endometrium with the tablets, but now I didn't have to use it.
Yeah,
It's the same
yeah.
tablets which you use. The
Yeah,
oral
yeah,
ones are the
actually
ones you
same.
which it's the same tablet. There's no
But
difference.
I never found any benefit. Even I've never found any benefit. Although one of the companies, they have claimed that their tablets are they can be used vaginally. They have entitled for vaginal use also. But I've never found any additional benefit of using them vaginally. Any other questions from the participants? So I think all the questions have been answered, and it was a wonderful talk. Definitely, I think everything is so crystal clear. And I really congratulate Dr. Monica for making your topic such a wonderful understanding for all of us. So
Thank you
with
all
this,
for being here. It's a great encouragement. It's nice discussing things with everyone.
yeah,
So thanks for your
yeah,
positive comments.
yeah, yeah.
And
So
in the group, if you have any doubts or any lingering questions or any comments, you can add it to the WhatsApp group and we'll be more than happy to answer or discuss your whatever issues you have.
yeah.
Thank you so
Okay
much.
then. Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
Good
you,
night,
Dr.
ma'am.
Pooja. It's so
Okay.
nice being
Yeah.
with you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.